My parents loved only my golden brother. He sabotaged work, so I sued him. I was at that dinner table, listening to Jake go on about his passion and his new job, while my parents soaked it all in like sponges. They laughed, nodded, and praised him as if he'd just climbed Mount Everest. Meanwhile, I sat there, invisible. My parents' obligatory "how's work, Alex?" was just that, obligatory. I knew the drill by now. They'd ask, I'd answer, and the conversation would shift right back to Jake. But that night, something snapped in me. Maybe it was the fact that I just pulled off a major project at work, one that took months of 14-hour days and sleepless nights. Or maybe I was just sick of playing second fiddle. Whatever it was, I decided to push back. I started, trying to keep my voice steady. I just closed a huge deal at work. It's one of the biggest our team's ever handled. My dad barely looked up from his plate. "That's good, son. Busy is good." Jake snorted. "Man, you need to loosen up, Alex. Life isn't all about work, you know?" I clenched my fists under the table. It's not about work. It's about being taken seriously for once. The table went silent. My mom gave me that look, the one that screamed, "Don't ruin the evening." Jake leaned back in his chair, smirking like this was all some joke to him. "What are you talking about?" Mom asked finally. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "I'm talking about how Jake gets to breeze through life making mistake after mistake, and you two act like he's some kind of hero. Meanwhile, I've been busting my ass, and it's like I don't even exist to you." Mom gasped. "Alex, that's not fair, isn't it?" I shot back. "Jake crashes Dad's car, and it's boys will be boys. I forget to take out the trash, and I'm grounded for a month. Do you have any idea how that feels?" My dad set his fork down, his expression hardening. "Watch your tone." "No, I'm done watching my tone," I said, my voice rising. "I'm done sitting here pretending everything's fine when it's not. You've made it clear who your favorite is, and it's not me." Jake laughed nervously. "Dude, this isn't about favorites. You're just wound too tight." I turned to him, my anger boiling over. "You don't get to tell me how to feel, Jake. You've never had to work for anything in your life. You screw up, and they cover for you. I screw up, and I'm the family disappointment. Enough." Dad's voice cut through the room like a knife. "We are not having this conversation here." I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Of course we're not, because it's easier to ignore the truth. But you know what? I'm done trying to prove myself to you." I grabbed my coat and left without looking back. As I drove home, my mind raced. Years of resentment and frustration had just come spilling out, and I had no idea what the fallout would be. Part of me felt relieved. I'd finally said what I needed to say. But another part of me felt like I'd just set fire to the only bridge I had left with my family. The weeks that followed were tense. My parents didn't call, and I wasn't about to be the one to reach out first. Jake texted me once, a half-hearted "you good," that I ignored. Work became my escape. I threw myself into it, staying late at the office and volunteering for projects just to keep my mind off the mess I'd left behind. Then, out of the blue, my mom called. I almost didn't pick up, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hi, Alex," she said, her voice unusually soft. "Hi, Mom." There was a long pause. "We've been thinking about what you said." I didn't respond. What was I supposed to say to that? "We want to talk," she continued. "As a family." The word family hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to believe her, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another attempt to sweep everything under the rug. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Okay, let me know." I hung up and stared at my phone. For the first time in years, my parents seemed willing to listen. But could I trust them to actually hear me? Or was this just another performance, another way to keep Jake on his pedestal while I stayed in the shadows? I didn't know the answer, but one thing was clear. Whatever came next, I wasn't going to stay silent. Not anymore. Things at work had been running smoothly, or so I thought. A few months after the blowout with my family, things started to get strange. At first, it was small stuff. Emails I was sure I had sent would mysteriously vanish from my outbox. A client meeting I had spent weeks preparing for was suddenly rescheduled without my knowledge, and I looked like an idiot when I showed up to the wrong conference room. At first, I chalked it up to bad luck or my own oversight. Maybe I was overworked and slipping up more than usual. But then the rumors started. It began subtly. Whispers in the break room that stopped the moment I walked in. Colleagues avoiding eye contact or cutting conversations short. Then came the accusations. Someone reported me to HR for inappropriate behavior, specifically, sending unprofessional messages to a junior colleague. I was blindsided. I hadn't sent anything remotely inappropriate to anyone. When I confronted the HR manager, Laura, she showed me printed screenshots of messages supposedly from my work email. I stared at the printouts in disbelief. The messages were crude, embarrassing, and completely fabricated. "This isn't me," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone set me up." Laura's expression softened, but I could tell she was skeptical. "Alex, I want to believe you, but this is serious. We'll conduct a full investigation. In the meantime, I'm recommending a temporary suspension." Suspension. Just like that, years of hard work and dedication were thrown into jeopardy. I left the office that day feeling humiliated and betrayed. At home, I tried to piece together what was happening. Who would go out of their way to sabotage me? I didn't have any enemies at work, or so I thought. But the coincidences were piling up. The lost emails, the rescheduled meetings, and now this. Someone was targeting me, and I had no idea why. The next day, I got a call from my mentor at work, Marcus. Marcus had been at the company for decades and had taken me under his wing when I first joined. He sounded hesitant on the phone. "Alex, can we meet?" he asked. We met at a quiet cafe away from the office. Marcus leaned in close, his voice low. "I don't know how to say this, but you need to watch your back." "What are you talking about?" I asked. "There are people at the company who want you out," he said. "I've been hearing things, rumors about you, your work ethic, even your personal life. None of it sounds like you, but people are starting to believe it. Who's behind it?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. Marcus hesitated. "I don't know for sure, but I heard someone mention a name. Nathan." Nathan was a mid-level manager I'd barely interacted with. Why would he have it out for me? None of it made sense. But Marcus's warning made one thing clear. This was bigger than I had realized. Things escalated quickly. HR's investigation turned up enough fabricated evidence to justify stripping me of a promotion I'd been working toward for years, a position that would have come with a $200,000 salary. Losing that opportunity felt like a punch to the gut. As I tried to salvage my career, something else caught my attention. Jake. Over the past few months, he'd undergone a sudden and dramatic transformation. He was wearing expensive tailored suits, flashing a new luxury watch, and posting photos of extravagant trips to Europe on social media. Jake, who'd always been barely scraping by, suddenly looked like he was living the high life. I confronted him about it during a rare family gathering. "Nice watch," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. Jake smirked. "Thanks. It's a Rolex." "Must have cost a fortune," I said, eyeing him suspiciously. "How'd you afford it?" Jake shrugged. "I've been investing. Got lucky with some crypto." Crypto? Jake could barely manage a checking account, and now he was some kind of financial wizard? I didn't buy it. Later that night, I decided to dig deeper. I scoured his social media, looking for clues. The photos from Europe were flashy, Jake posing in front of the Eiffel Tower, dining at Michelin-starred restaurants, and lounging on a yacht in the Mediterranean. But something felt off. The captions were vague, and the timing of the posts didn't match up with the timestamps on his flight receipts I'd seen once by chance. Things took an even darker turn when I received an anonymous email. The subject line read, "You're being played." Attached was a folder of screenshots and documents, evidence that someone had been using a proxy server to access my work email and send those fabricated messages. The IP address traced back to Jake's apartment. I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. Jake was sabotaging me. But why? What did he have to gain from ruining my career? The next day, I confronted him. I showed up at his apartment unannounced, clutching the printouts from the anonymous email. "What the hell is this, Jake?" I demanded, shoving the papers in his face. He looked at them briefly before smirking. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," I said, my voice trembling with rage. "You've been hacking into my email, spreading rumors, and screwing with my career. Why? Jake leaned back against the counter, his smirk widening. Because you always thought you were better than me. This is about jealousy? I asked incredulously. You're ruining my life because of some petty sibling rivalry? Jake's expression darkened. It's not petty. You've always been the favorite, Alex. The golden boy with the perfect job and perfect life. Mom and Dad might not see it, but I do. And I'm done living in your shadow. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You think I'm the favorite? Are you delusional? They've worshipped you since we were kids. Jake laughed bitterly. Keep telling yourself that. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to punch him. You've crossed the line, Jake. I don't care what your problem is. You're going to fix this, or I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you've done. His smirk faltered for a moment, replaced by something colder, more calculating. Good luck proving it, he said. And even if you do, who do you think they'll believe? The charming older brother or the workaholic who's always had a chip on his shoulder? After my confrontation with Jake, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his sudden financial windfall than crypto luck. His smugness, his defiance, it all pointed to something bigger. That anonymous email about him hacking into my account had been a wake-up call. If Jake was willing to sabotage my career out of jealousy, what else was he capable of? I decided to dig deeper. At first, I wasn't sure where to start, but then I remembered something. Jake had once borrowed my old laptop years ago. I never got it back, and I hadn't thought much about it until now. What if he'd been using it for more than Netflix binges? I showed up at my parents' house one weekend when I knew they'd be out. My plan was simple: find the laptop and see if it held any clues. As I rummaged through Jake's old room, I stumbled across something I hadn't expected: bank statements, half buried under a pile of papers. I didn't mean to snoop, but one glance at the numbers stopped me cold. Jake had been receiving monthly transfers of $10,000 from my parents' account. The payment started about 6 months ago, the same time my problems at work had begun. My hands trembled as I stared at the statements. Why were my parents giving Jake that much money? And why hadn't they told me about it? The discovery felt like a betrayal, another knife in the back from the people who were supposed to have my best interests at heart. I didn't confront my parents right away. Instead, I hired a private investigator, someone recommended by a colleague who'd gone through a messy divorce. His name was Eric, a grizzled, no-nonsense guy with a knack for finding dirt. Eric got to work immediately. A week later, he called me with an update. You might want to sit down for this, he said. What did you find? I asked, bracing myself. Your brother's been busy, Eric said. He's been passing on confidential information about your company to one of your biggest competitors. Looks like he's been forging your signature on documents to make it look like you were the one leaking the info. My stomach dropped. Are you sure? I've got the proof, Eric said. Emails, contracts, even a couple of recordings. He's been working with someone inside your company, a guy named Nathan. Nathan, the name Marcus had warned me about. It all started to click into place. Nathan was the inside man, feeding Jake the information he needed to bring me down. And Jake had been using my name to cover his tracks. The revelation left me reeling. Jake wasn't just sabotaging me out of spite. He was actively trying to destroy my career. And my parents? They were unknowingly funding his schemes. The $10,000 monthly transfers were probably how he'd been paying for his expensive lifestyle, his trips to Europe, and his bribes to Nathan. I decided to confront my parents first. They deserved a chance to explain themselves before I went nuclear on Jake. I showed up at their house unannounced, holding the bank statements. Why are you giving Jake $10,000 a month? I asked, not bothering with pleasantries. My mom's face went pale. Alex, it's not what you think. Then what is it? I demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're bankrolling him while he's ruining my life. My dad sighed, running a hand through his hair. Jake said he was in trouble. He needed help. What kind of trouble? I asked, my voice rising. Because he's not in trouble now. He's living like a king while I'm barely holding on to my job. My mom started to cry. He told us not to tell you. He said you judge him. Judge him? I snapped. Do you even know what he's been doing with that money? They stared at me, silent. I laid it all out for them. The private investigator, the the forged signatures, the leaked information. My parents looked stunned, but part of me wondered if they were just pretending. After all, they'd been enabling Jake his entire life. Confronting Jake was next. This time, I wasn't going to let him weasel his way out of it. I arranged to meet him at a bar near his apartment. When he arrived, I could tell he wasn't expecting a fight. He sauntered in, wearing another new designer jacket, his confidence oozing from every pore. "You wanted to talk?" he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "I know what you've been doing," I said, my voice cold. "The sabotage, the leaks, the forged documents. All of it." Jake's smirk faltered for a second before he recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Cut the crap," I snapped. "I hired a PI. I have emails, recordings, and proof that you've been working with Nathan to ruin me." For the first time, Jake looked genuinely nervous. "You can't prove anything," he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. "Oh, I can," I said, "and I will. Unless you come clean to Mom and Dad and fix this." Jake leaned back, his smirk returning. "You really think they'll believe you over me? They've always taken my side, and you know it." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I refused to back down. "Maybe they will, maybe they won't, but the evidence doesn't lie. And once this gets out, you won't just lose their trust. You'll lose everything." Jake stared at me, his jaw tightening. For a moment, I thought he might actually apologize, but instead, he stood up and walked away without another word. The fallout was immediate. I presented the evidence to my parents, who were horrified, not just by Jake's actions, but by their own role in enabling him. They confronted him, but Jake doubled down, insisting that I was lying and that the evidence was fabricated. In the end, it didn't matter. I had enough proof to clear my name at work and expose Jake's involvement in the leaks. Nathan was fired, and Jake's reputation was shattered. But the damage to our family was done. My parents tried to make amends, but I wasn't sure if I could forgive them, or Jake. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. And as much as I wanted to move on, part of me knew that the scars from this betrayal would never fully heal. I didn't sleep the night before the family meeting. My mind raced with a mix of anger, anticipation, and something that felt uncomfortably like dread. I had spent weeks gathering evidence, connecting dots, and rebuilding my professional reputation. But this wasn't just about Jake anymore. This was about all of us. My family had been complicit in ways I was only beginning to understand. I called the meeting myself, insisting that everyone, my parents, Jake, and I, be there. We met at my parents' house on a Sunday evening. The living room, once a place of childhood memories, now felt like a courtroom. The tension was thick enough to choke on. I started without preamble. "I know everything," I said, looking each of them in the eye. "The sabotage, the money, the lies. It's all out in the open now." My mom, Mary, shifted uncomfortably on the couch. "Alex, maybe we should." "No." I cut her off. "No more deflecting. Jake, why don't you tell them what you've done?" Jake leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his jaw tight. For a moment, I thought he might try to deny it again, but then he surprised me. "Fine," he said, his voice sharp. "Yeah, I did it. I leaked your work information, forged your signature, and screwed with your job. Happy now?" My mom gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My dad, George, looked stunned but said nothing. "But here's the thing," Jake continued, his tone defiant. "I didn't do it just for me. I did it because they told me to." He jabbed a finger toward our parents, his words like a slap in the face. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice rising. Jake laughed bitterly. "They wanted me to level the playing field. You were doing too well, Alex. Too successful, too far ahead. They didn't want me to feel left behind." I turned to my parents, my stomach twisting in disbelief. "Is that true?" My mom hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. My dad finally spoke, his voice low but firm. "We never told him to sabotage you. But you pressured him," I said, my anger boiling over. "You gave him money, you fed his insecurities, and you made him think he needed to tear me down to measure up." "Alex, you don't understand," my mom said, her voice trembling. "You've always been so focused on your career, so distant from the family. We just wanted to help Jake catch up, to make things fair. Fair? I shouted. You call this fair? You've been enabling him his entire life, and now you're blaming me for your mistakes? The room exploded into chaos. Jake and I shouted over each other while my mom sobbed and my dad tried to play mediator. It was like years of buried resentment, guilt, and frustration had erupted all at once, and there was no stopping it. You've always looked down on me, Jake yelled, his face red with anger. Ever since we were kids, you acted like you were better than me, because I had to work twice as hard to get half as much. I shot back. Well, you got a free pass for everything. And what did that get you? My dad interjected. A big job, a fancy apartment, but no time for your family. You left us behind, Alex. I turned to him, stunned. Left you behind? I've been trying to prove myself to you my entire life. And no matter what I did, it was never enough. You always chose Jake. My mom's sobs grew louder, and my dad looked away, his expression a mix of guilt and defiance. Jake, meanwhile, was seething. You think you're the victim here? Jake said, his voice dripping with venom. You've had everything handed to you on a silver platter. Respect, recognition, success. I had to fight for scraps. You didn't fight for anything, I snapped. You cheated, lied, and stole your way through life. And they let you get away with it. The argument raged on for what felt like hours. At one point, my mom tried to plead with us to stop, but neither Jake nor I were willing to back down. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back. Eventually, I stood up, my hands shaking with anger and exhaustion. I can't do this anymore, I said. I'm done trying to fix this family. If you want to keep enabling Jake, fine, but don't expect me to be a part of it. Alex, wait, my mom said, reaching for me. Please, don't leave like this. I turned to her, my voice cold. You wanted to level the playing field? Congratulations. You succeeded. And with that, I walked out, leaving them to deal with the mess they had created. As I drove home, my mind raced with conflicting emotions: anger, sadness, relief. The family I had spent my whole life trying to please had betrayed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. But for the first time, I felt like I had taken control. Whatever came next, I knew one thing. I was done being their scapegoat. After the fallout with my family, I knew I had to focus on clearing my name at work. Everything I'd built over the years, my reputation, my career, my future, had been put on the line because of Jake's schemes. The evidence I'd gathered with the help of Eric, the private investigator, was damning, but convincing my company to believe me after all the accusations and rumors would be another uphill battle. I scheduled a meeting with HR and the senior executives, including my direct manager, Sarah Michaels. Sarah was one of the few people who had seemed genuinely skeptical of the claims against me from the beginning, but even she couldn't ignore the fabricated evidence Jake and Nathan had planted. Now, it was time to set the record straight. The conference room felt colder than usual as I walked in, carrying a thick folder of documents and a flash drive containing the recordings Eric had provided. Sarah was seated at the head of the table, flanked by two HR representatives, Laura and Greg, who had handled the initial investigation. The company's legal counsel, a stern woman named Claudia, sat to the side, her eyes scanning me like a hawk. Thank you for coming, Alex, Sarah began. We understand you've requested this meeting to provide new information regarding the recent allegations. That's correct, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the tension in the room. I've gathered evidence that not only clears my name, but also identifies the individuals responsible for the misconduct. I plugged the flash drive into the room's presentation system and opened a folder titled Evidence A. Ross. The first item I played was an audio recording of Nathan and Jake discussing their plan to forge my signature and leak confidential information to one of our competitors. The room was silent as Jake's voice filled the space. You're sure this'll work? Jake said. Alex is so busy playing the perfect employee. He won't even see it coming. Trust me, Nathan replied. Once we pin this on him, no one will question it. He's got a spotless record. Makes it even more believable that he'd have a hidden side. As the recording ended, Sarah's eyes widened. Is this real? She asked. It is, I said. The investigator I hired verified the authenticity of every recording and document in this folder. I moved on to the emails. They included screenshots of messages Nathan had sent using a spoofed version of my work email, containing false information that had led to several missed opportunities and strained client relationships. Each email was time-stamped and traced back to an IP address registered to Jake's apartment. "I don't understand," Laura said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would your brother do this to you?" I looked at her, my expression grim. Jealousy, resentment, years of feeling inferior. Take your pick. The presentation lasted nearly an hour as I methodically laid out the case. I included financial records showing Jake's payments to Nathan and a timeline that matched the beginning of my workplace troubles with the first of those payments. By the end, there was no doubt left in anyone's mind. I had been set up, and Jake and Nathan were the architects of the plan. Sarah leaned back in her chair, exhaling deeply. "Alex, I'm so sorry this happened to you. If I had known—" "You couldn't have known," I said, cutting her off. "Jake made sure of that. But now that the truth is out, I need to know what happens next." Greg, one of the HR reps, spoke up. "We'll need to conduct our own investigation to verify the evidence you've provided, but based on what we've seen so far, I'd say it's compelling." "I'll handle the internal review personally," Claudia added, "and I'll ensure the legal team takes appropriate action against Nathan and any external parties involved." Sarah nodded. "In the meantime, Alex, consider yourself fully reinstated. Any disciplinary actions previously taken against you will be reversed immediately." "What about the promotion?" I asked, my tone firm. "I earned that position, and I lost it because of this mess." Sarah hesitated for a moment before nodding again. "You're right. We'll revisit the promotion decision as soon as the internal review is complete. If everything checks out, and I believe it will, you'll get what you deserve." The investigation took 2 weeks. During that time, I returned to work with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Most of my colleagues were supportive, offering apologies for believing the rumors or doubting me. But there were still a few who kept their distance, as if unsure whether to trust me. One morning, Claudia called me into her office. "We've concluded the investigation," she said, "and I have good news." She handed me a thick report detailing the findings. Jake and Nathan's guilt had been confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt. Nathan had been terminated, and legal action was being pursued against both him and Jake for damages caused to the company and my professional reputation. "As for your promotion," Claudia continued, a small smile breaking through her otherwise stern demeanor, "it's been reinstated. Congratulations, Alex. You've earned it." The moment was bittersweet. While I was thrilled to have my name cleared and my hard work recognized, I couldn't ignore the cost. My relationship with Jake, and to some extent with my parents, was in shambles. The wounds from their betrayal were still fresh, and I wasn't sure if they would ever fully heal. The next day, Sarah called a team meeting to announce my promotion. She praised my resilience and professionalism, calling me a valuable asset to the company. As my colleagues clapped and congratulated me, I felt a sense of vindication, but it was tempered by the knowledge of everything I had lost along the way. I didn't want it to come to this, but I had no choice. Jake's actions, fueled by my parents' funding, had nearly destroyed my career. I couldn't let them walk away from this without facing the consequences. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. They needed to be held accountable for the damage they'd caused. After consulting with Rachel, my lawyer, I filed 2 lawsuits: defamation against Jake and embezzlement against my parents. As surreal as it felt to sue my own family, the weight of their betrayal was heavier. Rachel was thorough and relentless, ensuring every detail of my case was meticulously prepared. When my family received the legal notices, the fallout was immediate. My mom called me in tears. "Alex, how could you do this to us?" she sobbed. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice calm. "You gave Jake tens of thousands of dollars while he was sabotaging me. Do you have any idea what that did to my life?" "We didn't mean for it to go this far," she pleaded. "Jake said he needed help. He was struggling, Alex. What were we supposed to do? You were supposed to support your family, not pit us against each other," I snapped. "Instead, you stole from the family fund and used it to destroy me." My dad took the phone from her. His tone was cold, sharp, and filled with anger. "You're making a mistake, Alex. This will ruin everything." "No," I said firmly. "The mistake was yours. I'm just making sure you face the consequences." The first court hearing was set for Jake's case. I'd spent sleepless nights preparing, going over every piece of evidence with Rachel. On the day of the trial, I walked into the courtroom feeling a mix of anger and determination. Jake showed up with a flashy defense attorney who wasted no time painting me as the vindictive younger brother trying to ruin his sibling's life out of jealousy. Rachel was ready for them. She presented the audio recordings, the forged documents, and the financial transactions linking Jake to Nathan and the leaked information. When Jake took the stand, his confidence faltered. Rachel's cross-examination was brutal. "You admitted to forging Alex's signature on confidential documents. Is that correct?" "Yes," Jake muttered. "And you leaked those documents to a competitor?"
"Yes."
"Why?" Rachel asked, her tone icy. Jake hesitated, glancing toward our parents, who sat silently in the gallery. I was under pressure," he finally said. "They wanted me to do it." Rachel leaned in. "Who's they?" "My parents," Jake said, his voice barely audible. "They told me I had to level the playing field." His words echoed through the courtroom. My stomach twisted as the betrayal sank in deeper. The next trial focused on my parents. They had hired a well-known lawyer who argued that their intentions had been misinterpreted, that the money given to Jake was a form of parental support, not embezzlement. Rachel wasn't fazed. Using the financial records, she demonstrated how the money, over $60,000, had been diverted from the family fund to Jake's account over several months. This was money meant for emergencies, shared family expenses, or future investments, not personal handouts to fund one's son's schemes. My mom took the stand first. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to explain. "We just wanted to help Jake. He was struggling so much, and Alex, he seemed like he didn't need us anymore." Rachel didn't let her off the hook. "You're saying that because Alex was successful, you felt justified in using shared family funds to support Jake, even though you knew what he was doing with that money?" "We didn't know," my mom cried. "We didn't know he was going to hurt Alex." My dad's testimony was colder. "Alex has always put himself above this family," he said. "He's ambitious, yes, but he's selfish. He left us behind, so we did what we had to do for Jake. I couldn't hold back anymore. I left you behind because you never supported me. You made me feel like I had to prove myself every single day, and even then, it was never enough." The judge banged the gavel, calling for order. The trial continued, but my father's words lingered. After weeks of grueling testimony and cross-examinations, the verdicts were delivered. Jake was found guilty of defamation and ordered to pay $150,000 in damages. My parents were held accountable for embezzlement and ordered to pay $300,000 in restitution to the family fund. The financial blow was devastating. They didn't have the means to pay such a large sum, and the only option was to sell their house. Watching them pack up the home where I'd grown up was a surreal experience. Part of me felt guilty, but another part knew it was necessary. They had made their choices, and now they had to live with the consequences. After the trials, Jake disappeared from the public eye, retreating to some unknown place to avoid further fallout. My parents moved into a small apartment far from the comfortable lifestyle they had once enjoyed. They reached out occasionally, but our conversations were brief and strained. I wasn't ready to forgive them. Maybe I never would be. As for me, I focused on rebuilding my life. The $150,000 from Jake's settlement allowed me to pay off debts and invest in my future. Therapy helped me process the trauma of the betrayal and the realization that sometimes family isn't worth the pain they bring. In the end, justice was served, but it came at a heavy price. My family was shattered, and the scars they left behind would take years to heal. But for the first time, I felt free to live my life on my terms, without the weight of their expectations and betrayals holding me back. Leaving my hometown was one of the hardest yet most liberating decisions I'd ever made. After the lawsuits, the trials, and the emotional wreckage that followed, I knew I needed a fresh start. The memories tied to that city, the betrayals, the lies, the bitterness, were too heavy to carry any longer. So, I packed my things, said goodbye to what little remained of my old life, and moved 500 miles away to a new city. A new beginning. I found a job at a top-tier financial firm, one that came with a salary of $250,000 a year. It wasn't just a promotion in terms of income. It was a chance to rebuild my professional reputation and step into a role that truly challenged me. My boss, a sharp and no-nonsense woman named Evelyn Carter, quickly became a mentor. She didn't care about my past or my family drama. All that mattered to her was my ability to deliver results, and I thrived under her leadership. Evelyn introduced me to the team, a mix of seasoned professionals and ambitious newcomers. Among them was Ryan, a junior analyst with a quick wit and an endless supply of bad jokes. Then there was Priya, a meticulous project manager whose efficiency was both intimidating and inspiring. Over time, they became more than colleagues. They became friends. Ryan, Priya, and I started grabbing drinks after work, swapping stories, and venting about the daily grind. For the first time in years, I felt like I had people in my corner. People who didn't see me as the golden child or the scapegoat for family drama. They just saw me as Alex. Adjusting to the new city wasn't without its challenges. The first few weeks were lonely, especially in the evenings when I'd come home to my empty apartment. I'd sit by the window, staring at the city lights, wondering if I'd made the right choice. But every time doubt crept in, I reminded myself of why I left, to escape the toxicity and build a life where I could finally breathe. The city itself was alive, vibrant, and full of opportunity. I explored its winding streets, tried new foods, and attended events I'd never considered before. At one gallery opening, I met Laura, an artist with a sharp tongue and a knack for making people laugh. She introduced me to her circle of friends, writers, musicians, and entrepreneurs, all brimming with energy and creativity. Being around them was a breath of fresh air, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at home. While my life was on the upswing, things for my family were spiraling out of control. Jake's fall from grace was swift and brutal. After losing the lawsuit, his reputation was in shambles. Word spread quickly about his actions, how he had sabotaged his own brother for personal gain. No company wanted to touch him. The flashy lifestyle he had built on lies and borrowed money came crashing down. The expensive shopping sprees, the luxury vacations, the designer suits, they all disappeared. Jake was forced to sell off his prized possessions, including the Rolex he'd once flaunted so proudly. He moved out of his upscale apartment and into a dingy one-bedroom on the outskirts of town. He tried reaching out to old friends for help, but most of them had turned their backs on him, unwilling to associate with someone so toxic. I heard about his struggles through mutual acquaintances. Part of me felt sorry for him, but another part knew he was reaping the consequences of his actions. He had made his choices, and now he had to live with them. My parents, Mary and George, didn't fare much better. After losing the lawsuit, they were forced to sell the house I had grown up in, a sprawling property in one of the city's most prestigious neighborhoods. It sold for $1.2 million, enough to cover their debts, but not enough to maintain the lifestyle they were accustomed to. They moved into a modest house on the outskirts of town, far removed from the affluent circles they had once been a part of. Their new neighborhood was quiet and unremarkable, a stark contrast to the bustling social life they had once enjoyed. My mom, who had thrived on hosting dinner parties and charity events, now spent her days alone, her social calendar empty. My dad, ever the prideful man, refused to acknowledge the reality of their situation, but I knew it ate away at him. Occasionally, they would reach out to me, short, tentative messages asking how I was doing. I responded politely but kept my distance. I wasn't ready to let them back into my life, not after everything they had done. In the months that followed, I focused on building a life that was entirely my own. Work kept me busy, but I made sure to carve out time for myself and the people who mattered. I joined a running club, started volunteering at a local nonprofit, and even took up cooking, a skill I'd always neglected but found oddly therapeutic. Ryan and Priya became regular fixtures in my life, their friendship a constant source of support. Laura and her circle of creatives pushed me to think differently, to embrace experiences I'd once shied away from. My world had expanded in ways I never thought possible, and I was grateful for every moment of it. One evening, as I sat on my balcony overlooking the city, I reflected on how far I had come. The bitterness and anger that had consumed me for so long were finally beginning to fade. My family's betrayal had left scars, but they no longer defined me. I had built something new, something better, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. Jake's downfall and my parents' fall from grace were stark reminders of the consequences of their actions. They had tried to tear me down, but in the end, they had only destroyed themselves. And while part of me still grieved for the family we could have been, I knew that leaving them behind was the best decision I had ever made. This was my new beginning, a life built on honesty, hard work, and the support of people who truly cared. And as I looked out at the city lights, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, I was ready to face them. Alone, if necessary, but never lonely.